Welcome to Mic Drop, the podcast where relevancy is irrelevant and we don't give a shit about your feelings.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the next installment of Team Dog Podcast. On a regular basis, I like to take people's questions and talk about dog-related issues, training principles, etc., and just kind of open the floor up for you guys to ask me whatever the hell you want to ask. Keep in mind a couple of things while I go through these. Number one is that a lot of the questions are either repeats of episodes I've already done or they're very similar to several other questions. So if your question does not get answered after being read specifically, read between the lines a little bit. And if it's a really similar question to what I'm answering, then just pay attention or choke yourself. Also, you'll see a lot of references to my training book and my training website. That's not shameless plugs. That's the whole reason that I came out with the damn things to begin with, is to give people a resource, to basically address the same conversation I would have with people all the time about, my dog's doing this, he's reactive to other dogs, or he won't eat, or, the clicker confuses him, or he doesn't want to go in the crate. You'll be filling the fucking blank. All of the resources that I put out there, both in the book and the Team Dog Training website, are all to accommodate stuff like this. Having said that, there is no substitute for an in-depth explanation of some of these questions and the nuances of some of the specifics that vary from person to person. So keep that in mind. I'm going to get right into it here and just go down the list of questions that I'm going to field. So here we go. All right, so the first question is from Artist Lens. What is the hardest dog you've ever worked? Strangely enough, there's not really a hardest dog that I could point to. There's a handful of them over the course of the years that I've been involved with these types of dogs that stick out, however, and I'll talk about a couple of them. The very first Dutch Shepherd I ever got was a dog named Dingo that was from a special operations unit from overseas that had been washed out of the program because he removed the thumb of his handler, and they were going to put him down, and so he got kind of smuggled out of the country and ended up in my hands, and he was a real motherfucker to deal with. I had him for several years. He bit me a number of times, and the day that I sold him to a fellow gentleman in the industry for his breeding program, he was every bit as ready, willing, and able to eat my ass as the day that I picked him up. I never developed much of a bond with him. It was more of he trusted me for the most part, but was very quick and didn't need much of a reason to decide, I'm going to take a shot at the title. And he did on a regular basis. Pretty much every dog that was on the West Coast when I was a trainer there with the SEAL MPC program, they were all difficult in their own way, just like with people. But their drive and backbone, strength and character, forward natural aggression, things of that nature were all at such a level of magnitude to which they were very, very difficult to train in some aspects, and you had to really think about what you were doing. And have a good training plan every time you got that dog out of the kennel. And that was pretty much all of them there. So, since I've been back here, from having left there, all of the warrior dogs kind of fit into that same category, and that they all have their quirks and issues, some harder than others. But, the whole reason that they're here, and right now we have 18 of them with a 19th about to come in. They're all here for a reason, and it's not because they're easy to deal with. The good aspect about that is that I've learned so much more about training than I would have ever imagined by just having them here and having to deal with some of their issues, that got them here in the first place. So it's been a hell of a training experience. And for those people out there, we're actually looking for a kennel tech now. If you want to learn about dog behavior, taking care of almost 20 retired working dogs day in, day out will teach you way fucking more than any training academy will ever even dream to teach you. So email info@Tricos if you're interested. It is a hard position to fill because it's It's tough work. It's cleaning shit and exercising dogs and dealing with dogs that are looking for a reason to come after you. But very, very rewarding and incredibly insightful in terms of the knowledge that you can glean from that. So short answer, there isn't a hardest dog. Many of them over the years have proven to be difficult. All right, so Andrew Baker and Roadhog011 have kind of a similar question here. To synopsize it, it's how do I help a dog learn to become gentle and emotionally intelligent around children? So great question and a very common one. Also something that, regularly plagues households. They have young kids or they're going to have a baby or whatever, and they've got a young, strong adult or just a dog that's super energetic, and you're trying to teach them how to be ginger around beings that need to be ginger around. Think of, in a hospice with old people that are, on death's door, and you're bringing service dogs in there, those types of dogs. That's kind of the goal that you're looking for, to get the dog to behave more like that. There's a double-edged sword and kind of two sides to this coin that I want to talk about, which is, a lot of it is genetics. That's just the reality of it, is that, the reason that service dogs are service dogs, yes, there's a high level of training that goes into it, but there's a genetic component that you cannot teach, that you can't manufacture, that you can't force, that you can't change. And that has to be there. Some dogs are much, much more inherently genetically focused or geared towards that type of work. And some are the exact opposite of that. I get asked a lot, hey, we were looking for service dogs. I don't do service dogs for that reason, is that general temperament is about as polar opposite as you can get from what I'm looking for in a good, strong working dog. Having said that, you have the dogs that you have, and you're trying to get them to be more or less excited by visitors or kids or whatever, and trying to get them to mind and have manners. And there's actually a ton of questions that kind of address this of, my dog just loses their shit when people come into the house. They're good training otherwise, or we've got kids and they're great other than when the kids are around and they start getting them wound up and they start banging into them and shit. So the genetic component aside, you have what you have. Realize though that's your limiting factor, right? That is going to dictate and determine what level of success you're going to have in getting the emotional intelligence and becoming quote unquote gentle around people that you want them to be gentle around. And that cap is what it is. Understanding what that is and where it is and the fact that it even fucking exists is half of people's problems. You can't take a square peg and shove it in a round hole the way a lot of people try to do within reason. Now, having said that, now that we've identified that that's part of the problem, the other fact is it's not unlike any other behavior that you're trying to teach. Is that you are going to teach it in your classroom first, and you're going to scale up the level of distraction in terms of what the dog is breaking the obedience and going and self-rewarding for, i.e. knocking kids over. Is that, start out by not throwing them into a situation where you don't have the ability to control it, A, and B, that they don't have enough repetition to draw from. That's really the secret to success with all of these things, is building enough repetition base so that the dog, defaults to and goes via muscle memory and basically has the reaction that you're looking for, or in this case, the absence of a reaction. The absence of a behavior is taught no different than the presence of a behavior, in that you're waiting, you're manipulating the dog's environment, you're using something that the dog wants to solicit that reaction, and then ultimately, once you get it, you mark it and reward it. In this case, it's chilling the fuck out. So go in your backyard and have distractions where, if the dog breaks it, either the kids are behind the fence, or something to that nature. In an environment where you can control the dog being able to break the obedience, but not be able to cause the problem that you're trying to get around. So an example would be your training classroom. Mine is a 40 by 40 chain link fence. I would work obedience in that area until I have him nuts dialed in to where it's a reaction every time I give him a command. I'm not going to introduce the kids and the distraction that I'm trying to work on until I've got him dialed in without it to the highest level possible. Once that's there, now I'm going to slowly introduce the kids or whatever it is that's throwing you for a loop. And then same thing. So if the kids are on the outside of that fence, just kind of walking by and he runs over to it, I'm going to ignore it. The second he comes back to me, bam, he gets marked and rewarded. That's where I would incorporate a place command. And I'll talk about that a number of times here in this podcast for sure. But teaching that solid place command, a down stay at a specific point, and working on that while there's distractions. And so how you incorporate that into your house, very simply, is you build that behavior in your classroom until it's dialed in with distractions, and then build it into your house where you've got a dog bed in a specific spot that stays there, that you're going and placing that son of a bitch on the bed every time. And when the kids are around, you go lay down on your bed and you chill out and you get marked and rewarded for it. That's a long process. I get it. People want a quick fix and a short answer. There isn't one. It's hard work and it takes repetition. Some dogs, it's going to take more than others depending on what their level of drive and excitability is. That's the nature of the beast. So it really is fairly simple. It just takes a fair bit of time and scaling build up to get that behavior out of them. All right. So again, there's a number of questions here that kind of all talk about reactivity, and so I'm gonna go into that next because it kind of dovetails onto what we just talked about. And again, there's a ton of them. I'll use Chad_Weiss, his question as an example. My Shepherd mix has come a long way in the past couple of years, off leash and on, almost better off. Not sure if that's me not paying as much of attention or not, but as soon as there's more than a couple people or dogs are around, he gets distracted. It's like pulling teeth to get him to listen to the smallest things. Any suggestions? All right, so very, very similarly is that I see this all the time, both with members until they've gone through the forums, and I encourage people to really read through the forums, because if you have a question, chances are we're in our third year of the online training resource. There's been a whole shit ton of other people that have had the exact same question. So read through that, and I am in there interjecting my advice and answering all these questions to a pretty large degree all the time. So go in there and check those out. However, this is something where it seems to plague people a lot because they're just trying to short stroke it a little bit. Not calling you out, Chad. I'm just talking about the reality of the training environment, is that it generally stems from a lack of sufficient repetition. Is that you've got to put that time in your training classroom. Again, it's manipulating the dog's environment in that training classroom. It's structuring it so that in that, while you're teaching, the dog is crated or otherwise neutralized in terms of its mental and physical stimulation and engagement, other than when you're training, so that there's a contrast. And that's gonna make everything sink in and learn faster, be learned faster. Is if the dog is in a crate or a kennel run, not stimulated other than when you're training, and that's when he's being fed and emotionally engaged with and mentally stimulated, then that's what makes the difference. But you've got to just continue more and more repetition, and then slowly scale up to where you're building in those distractions. In this case, maybe it's other dogs, again, on the outside of the fence. Or a dog in a crate in your training classroom, just sitting there barking at your dog. There's, whatever the problem is that you're having, set that environment up so that you're slowly introducing that in your training classroom where the dog is contextually used to behaving and seeing those things. If, your dog is nails inside your house and in your backyard and you're doing all these training sessions and everything's great, but you're not introducing the things that are distracting him out in town in that same contextual environment, of course, when he gets outside of that, he's going to be like, holy shit. It's like the stimulation lottery just was won. He's going to look at everything like, that's the coolest fucking thing ever. So you've got to introduce it into your classroom, into the environments that he's already comfortable in behaving. And if he's not where you want him there, then for the love of shit, do not take him out into the real world and expect good results. Because if you're not getting perfect results in your training classroom and in your house, you're going to get even less than perfect ones out in town every single time. So again, it's very similar to the last one. It's just using a different distraction, and it's really, fill in the blank for anything that my dog has a problem with X. Introduce X into your training classroom and scale it appropriately so that they're dealing with that distraction exactly how you want them to deal with it in your training classroom before you take them out into the real world and expect that same result. once you do go out into the training classroom, when all of those boxes are checked and that criteria is met, then go out there and use that as a training session with your marker and your reward, and go do that real world training session, which I outline in a couple of videos in the foundations portion of the online training. All right, so Biscuit and the Bean, a little bit of a similar question. In this case, it's an absence of a behavior. My Catahoula is very well behaved and listens to me 90% of the time. I hear that a lot, 90% of the time. A dog that's 90% trained is not trained. I'm just busting your chops. But that actually is the case. Like, if it's good 90% of the time, it's the 10% that's going to bite you in the ass when you need it to be that it's not. However, you say, whenever we're getting ready for a walk, going to the beach, do something she loves, she gets so excited, overly excited, that she starts yelling and just making all kinds of noises. Is there a way to get her to not be so loud when she's excited? Yes. And again, this is no different than incessant barking, which there was a couple questions about that as well. So this will address all of them. Is that those noises, I'll just give you a kind of a hypothetical, is let's say, for example, that you are getting ready to load the car up and you grab all your keys, the leash, your beach stuff, whatever, and she starts losing her fucking mind. Let her lose her mind and stand there and ignore it until she stops. The second she stops, you mark and reward it. You need to buffer that into a training session. Don't decide that you're going to get one repetition of her doing that and then go to the beach and now you've taken 12 steps back. You've got to get rid of that context, and I encourage you to check out the A+B=C formula lesson that I do on the online stuff that addresses that. But that's essentially what it is the presence of A, in this case, it's all of the stuff that you're getting ready to do, plus B is getting into the car and getting ready to, or actually going to do it, equals C, going and doing the fun things. So A+B=C in this case has happened enough times where now the presence of A, just getting your stuff together in the dog's mind, equals C, and that anticipation is why you're seeing that behavior. So you have to break that context, that contextual association of A and C. So now make it not equal it in terms of wearing it out, and wait for the cessation of that behavior, and then mark, reward it, and move down the road. So you're rewarding the absence of it, and you want to break the context of that behavior. Another video, I address the same thing of breaking context and building context. One of the lessons is to do both, is to pick a behavior where you specifically make A+B=C and you build that context to train or create a behavior in a dog. And then you pick one that you don't like and you figure out what the context is by working backwards. And then you break that context by making A+B not equal C enough to where they stop anticipating it. So again, very simple, but takes some time and planning and thought process. K_keto asks, what are your opinions on dogs and anxiety meds, i.e. Prozac, Trazodone for separation anxiety in general? Do you feel that when a dog has severe issues, it's beneficial when paired with training, or do you think it compromises things? Great question, fairly common one. Anxiety meds, I think, I view them in dogs like I do with people, is that generally I don't like them. I'm not going to say that you would never use them or that they should not ever be used in any circumstance. I would say that generally speaking, they're way overutilized and way overprescribed, both in people and in dogs. And I think that the reality of it is that the reason for them being prescribed is the same, is that it's a lack of stimulation, primarily mental, but also physical. Those two things cure so many things, again, in both people and dogs, that it's mind-numbing that we dope ourselves up. Before I would use any of those, I would not just physically exercise the dog. And I see this a lot where people say, the dog has anxiety, or they've got so much energy, so I'm just going to wear them out. But they're not doing any brain games. They're not building the dog's mental stimulation and that mental engagement that's actually making them think. And no different than, pick any time in the history of your life where you've been mentally stressed, whether it's cramming for a test or, let's say, a week of finals in high school where, physically you're not doing jack shit. but you're spending, all day, every day sitting down, working your brain hard, thinking like at the end of the day, you're fucking exhausted. Like you haven't done anything physical and you are spent. Like you've got no piss and vinegar left whatsoever. You want to do nothing but sleep. Now, couple that with also getting physical exercise, and you can see where the benefit would be with a dog who has separation anxiety. Whereas if you make them think, do lots of training sessions where you're using free shaping to get them to think and offer behaviors and problem solve and figure things out in conjunction with exercising them, that is step one. Is that a guarantee that they're not going to be anxiety ridden? No, but that is absolutely going to help. It fixes it way more times than not. And it's for sure the step I would take prior to doping them up and giving them Prozac or Xanax or whatever. So start with that. Now for dogs that I get this again all the time where people say, I work my dog out, 3 hours a day physically, and then he's still just a total pain in the ass. Essentially what you're doing when you exercise a dog that has a high level of energy is you're conditioning him and giving him a gas tank to be an even bigger pain in the ass. You're conditioning him to be a better pain in the ass. If you're not stimulating him mentally and engaging with him, from a cerebral standpoint. So very, very important. Do lots of figuring things out. And if your dog is already nails on training, teach him an arbitrary skill like fucking planking or, targeting, you can take a cone and teach him to go bump it with his nose on command from different directions, different distances. Teach him an arbitrary skill just for the fun of it that makes him think and distracts, deflects, and ultimately gets rid of them focusing on whatever the fucking problem is. So I'm a big fan of that combination in conjunction with really good food. I got some questions on that, which I'll talk about here when I get to them. But proper nutrition is also commensurate or paramount rather with your dog's ability to be healthy and not be a total pain in your ass. So good food, lots of mental stimulation, good physical stimulation and exercise, all in conjunction with that, coupled with a manipulated environment and a structured situation where you're kenneling him or crating him when you're gone after he's been emotionally and physically exhausted with a belly full of good food. And I think you'll find that you'll see a lot less of those incidences. One shameless plug, the Trichos CBD oil that we sell, look at the reviews. Like we've got tons of people who have bought the product and given it to the dogs in this conjunction. You tack that on to everything else that I just mentioned, and that's going to give you your best chance of not having to use meds. If you've done all of that in conjunction with the oil and given it, a solid, couple of months of working that, and the dog is still anxiety ridden, then yes, I would look at chemical options of some of the anti-anxiety meds. Next question spills over in from the last one. It's Lewin Grover says, will the CBD oil help a hyperactive dog who gets plenty of exercise settle down? Again, it's kind of that same thing. CBD oil is a fantastic resource for helping with a lot of things. And it works best when it's used in conjunction with a solid training regimen. But the biggest key component here is, and here's the key, 3 to 4 mile runs daily plus playtime, and the dog won't settle down. Nonstop energy. Make them think. Again, if all you're doing is exercising him, he's becoming better and better at being an asshole. So make him think and work his brain. Part of the question is, when is a good time to give the oil in terms of age-wise. Really, past, once a dog is 8 weeks, you can start giving it to him. It depends on why you're administering it, but the host of benefits, I encourage you to check out the website, are pretty lengthy and significant. So, I'm obviously an advocate and a proponent of giving it to dogs, on a routine basis for a host of reasons. But, all right, next question. Puppy Priya GSD. I have a 15-week-old German Shepherd. What's the best way to introduce her to our cat? I've heard anything from introduce them immediately and let them sort it out to wait months and months allowing them to see each other before physically allowing them to interact. The puppy seems very eager to play, and the cat seems very pissed by the puppy's excitement. Go figure. Pussy will do that, won't it? I'm afraid that we wait too long and the cat won't be able to put the puppy in her place because she'll be so big. I would love to hear your thoughts. One thing that struck me in your question is, if we wait too long, the cat won't be able to put the puppy in her place. Now, let me ask you something. I don't know if you have kids or not, but let's just say that you do. Do you think it's one of your child's responsibilities to put the other child in its place, or is that your fucking job? We all know the answer. That's your fucking job. It's not the cat's responsibility to put the dog in its place. That is 100% yours. And that's one of the problems, I think, with a lot of people. And I'm not picking on you, so don't take it that way. We're all adults here, and that's part of the discussion. But the reality of it is this: is that to answer your question on kind of the technical aspect, is that I am a huge fan of crating things next to each other for a period of days, weeks, months, however long it takes, until they stop giving a fuck about each other. Because, with animals, they know when they're right next to another animal, even in a crate. So I would have the cat in some sort of, carrier or whatever you want to put them in, or even just have them loose and have the puppy in a crate right there where they can see it, smell it, hear it, whatever, and stop being so excited about it. Now, a 15-week-old puppy, you don't have the repetition in that puppy's bank to be able to keep the amount of obedience and the cessation of impulse or impulse control in a 15-week-old puppy. So you have to physically manipulate that, i.e. with a crate or keeping them from interacting. You should not force the cat to deal with the dog coming up and being all up in its space and whatever, any different than, you would allow your kids to jump on, company's lap or each other if they're not supposed to, et cetera. So keep that in mind, is that, the same rules of personal space should apply to your dogs that they do with your kids and guests and other family members. While you go through the training process, again, if you take the foundations portion of the online training and go through it with this dog, after about 5 or 6 months, you should be at a place, if you've put the time in, where you've got the amount of control to where the dog's going to ignore the cat because you're making sure that he's ignoring the cat. It's fine to be curious. It's fine to look over at it. But, by using focus and engagement, eye contact, and control work with that dog, it's your job to teach that dog not to mess with the cat, and vice versa, frankly. I mean, it sounds like the cat's probably not going to go mess with the dog, but if that's the case on the transverse, it's not cool to if a cat is invading a dog's personal space and they don't want it there, the same rule applies, is that get control of that pussy. Anyway, that's the gist on that. I'm going to reiterate again that it's imperative that you take it upon yourself and not let them sort it out. You teach them what the rules and boundaries are, and don't let either one of your pets or any of them feel like it's on them to determine keeping other animals in check. All right, Jilf Nugent, I would love to hear your thoughts, vision for optimal animal shelter behavior programs, practices for canines that find themselves in an animal shelter. I'm glad you asked, Jill. Here's my take, and this is what I'm looking to incorporate is packages with the online training, with these behavior as a behavior program and practice for animal shelters or rescues, so that it's a greatly cost reduced option for people that are getting a dog out of a shelter. Looking at launching a campaign to accommodate something to that effect, but to me, there needs to be some guidance. So that is my thought and vision. Is I would love to help, anybody that adopts or rescues a dog from a shelter, is that they get enrolled immediately. Like, that's part of the adoption process, is they get enrolled into the team dog training resource and make a commitment to themselves, the dog and the shelter, to adhere to the program and follow it. I think it would work very well in terms of gaining leaps and bounds of not having dogs in and out of shelters and being returned, because people are being educated, and then also in turn educating and communicating with their dogs what the expectations are, so that everybody's on the same page, and the dogs aren't becoming problems and going back. So that's what I would love to see. We're looking at working on that. All right, let's see. Josh Chaney, 175, had put my 2 Jack Russells down. Love to get another dog, but I'm gone 10 hours a day and feel it's unfair to the dog to be home alone for that long of a time. I'm trying to make my kids understand if they had to piss or shit, they couldn't hold it for 10 hours. Thoughts? It's a good and common question, Josh. Two things. Do I think it's fair to leave a dog home alone for 10 hours? Well, there's 14 hours out of that day where they're not home alone. Now, is being home alone for 10 hours ideal? No, it isn't. In terms of making them hold it, they're not going to hold it. I mean, not until the dog is at least a year old or thereabouts, to where you could even have any realistic expectation of them holding their bladder for that long. That's where I would use a kennel environment, vice a crate. I would use the crate while you're there interacting with it and can get the dog in and out and structure your training around that. And when you're going to be gone for too long for them to hold it, have a kennel environment set up where they can go to the bathroom in that kennel run. Realize having them, especially if it's starting out with a puppy or even a rescue, whatever, is that having them in that kennel run for 10 hours a day where they're going to the bathroom is going to make it more difficult to potty train and house break that dog. No two ways about it. Doesn't make it impossible, but for sure is going to confuse the dog a little bit and make it a little more difficult to do that. To me, it's a judgment call. It's personal preference. I would probably still have a dog. Some people may say that's bullshit. That's your opinion. My opinion is that, if you structure it right, you can absolutely have a dog even with a busy schedule. Just realize that, now when you're not working and you're not, when you are home from that 10-hour shift, is that's not the time to put your feet up and watch football, or take a nap or sit in the fucking hot tub and hang out and get shit-faced. Like, if you're bringing a dog in, that's a responsibility, and you need to recognize that and spend that time that you are home really working with that dog and physically and mentally engaging and stimulating it. So that's my take. Orion Holmes, what resources did you pull from when developing your system of training dogs? The short answer is all of them. To me, if you want to call it my system, it's not really mine. I mean, it's a conglomerate of, it's a melting pot of every dog person I've ever come in contact with. I've learned a lot of things from a lot of people, and learned a lot of things on my own of fucking it up or learning the hard way. But, to me, the short answer is you should get as many training resources as possible. Like, you should train with as many people as you can, volunteer at shelters. If it's police work, try to get in with the local PDs and volunteer or help there. If it's search and rescue, if it's agility, whatever it is, the more experience and exposure you have, to being around dogs and reading them, the better. To me, there's an inherent value in going to shelters and helping out there and just observing dogs and canine behavior. I believe you'll learn more about reading a dog, which really is kind of the backbone and the crux to being a good dog trainer. Is you've got to have an innate, almost primal sense of non-verbally being able to both communicate and, more importantly, read that dog and understand what it's doing and why it's doing it. And you're only going to learn that by experience and having a lot of repetitions with a lot of different dogs doing different shit for different reasons. So, I've pulled from every resource possible is the gist of it. All right. Let's see. Siempre Cinema. No, I'm sorry. There's a number of questions here that are all basically the dog's reactive, and I've already addressed that, so I'm not going to beat that dead horse. JB Harpat, what do you use to clean your dog's ears? I have a lab mix and he's 7. I use Epiotic, which is a company or a brand rather that it's a dog cleaning solution. So I'll put that in the dog's ears, gently massage it with my hand, holding their head up so that it's getting in there and breaking up whatever the problem is, and then gently take a paper towel and or a baby wipe and just very, very gently kind of start to clean it out. I don't like to dig my fingers in there. Generally, they're going to shake their head. After you do that, I just try to get kind of the bulk of the fluid volume-wise soaked up with a paper towel so that when they shake their head, it's not getting all over the place. But that stuff works really, really well. Even if it's a specific infection, like if it's, a yeast or fungus or some sort of an ear infection like that, that's relatively common. Even then, I'd still use that stuff in conjunction with some sort of gram-specific positive or negative, depending upon what the infection is, antibiotic that's going to address that. But that's what I do. Scott Tack Williams 77. How would incorporating your style of training for bird hunting? I see most people incorporate Ecollars, but I would rather not. Honestly, I would follow the online training, but your A plus B equals C, and your getting from A to B is going to be specifically for hunting. So all of the same behaviors that you want for hunting, you're going to teach and train them the same way you do all of the basic obedience behaviors that I showcase in terms of shaping behavior, teaching it in a classroom, and marking and reinforcing it the exact same way. I'm not opposed to e-collars. I use them not very often, but I go through my process first before I ever even worry about an e-collar or even trying to incorporate it. So I would go about it that way. Photo, it's you. I have a mal that spins when I first put him in the kennel, and when I say spin, I mean Taz-like. I haven't exactly done great training this out of him. I've done the opposite and draw attention to it and let me get worked up. I've tried drawing attention to me in a treat. I've tried click and reward as soon as it stops. I'd love to properly break this behavior, but I'm not doing it right. I did post about this in the forums as well a long while ago. Any insight? There's a couple things. Number one, when you say you haven't done a good job training and out of them and you get worked up, that's a big part of the problem, is that if you're getting pissed off and emotionally charged, that's not the time to train your dog. Put them up and go away. The other thing too is when putting a dog into a kennel environment and they start spinning at that point, to me, there's a level of realistically, I would say more times than not in the warrior dogs, again, are a great example, is that most of them, when we first put them back, they'll start spinning like that. When you leave, they stop. Can you stand there and wait for the absence of the behavior and go through those training sessions? Yeah, you can, and that's how I would do it. And if you've tried that, I would just say if it's not working, you haven't done it long enough. There will come a point at which the dog will understand spinning isn't getting him anything. If it's that big of a deal to you where you're going to make that a priority, then do that. My opinion is who gives a shit, frankly, is that if he's spinning, walk away from him and ignore him. If there's that barrier between you and him and he's amped up and you're fueling that fire, walk away from it. That's just my take on it, is that I don't really see a point in spending hours and days and weeks and months trying to train that spinning behavior out of him while you're standing there after you've just put him up for what? Can you do it? Yeah, but it's going to be difficult because he's spun up and you're essentially waiting for a really high level of drive in terms of why that behavior is manifesting into that, because he's frustrated or excited or both. And so you're working against genetics to a certain extent. And again, on the broader spectrum, I would say, why do you want to do that? If it's that important to you, continue to do it and do 4, 5, 6, 7 training sessions every day, 3, 4, 5 minutes of getting him to stop spinning, marking, and rewarding. And that's all you're doing. Don't ever get him out. Like, again, if it's that big of a deal, that's how I would approach it, is walk up to the kennel. If he starts spinning, wait for him to stop, mark it, and reward it, and do that 4 or 5 minutes, and then leave and come back several hours later and do that again and teach him to stop spinning that way. And it may take weeks. Again, if that's worth it to you and it's that important, do it. And that's how I would do it. D Bosch 22, Mike, I have a 3-year-old rescued Pyrenees mix and have purchased 2 years and I'm a team dog member. I've gone through the first month, but I'm having real trouble with Duke. I want to train him because he has the normal bad manners of a spoiled dog. My problem is he has absolutely no food drive or ball drive. I've followed your steps, read your book, but I can't seem to get Duke to respond to anything that I have. I actually answered this a little bit, I think, on Instagram, but here's my take with food, and I know a couple of the members went back and forth because I asked, hey, are you feeding the dog? The short answer is every single dog in the world is going to have food drive at some point. a lot of people think that that's an extreme approach, or that you're being a dick by starving your dog, et cetera. It's not, and I'm happy to have that debate with anybody that thinks the opposite. But the reality of it is this: is that food is a primary reinforcer that the dog is not going to ignore to the point to which he's going to starve himself. And by starve himself, I mean when he's legitimately and literally hungry. Dogs wanting food and being hungry are two very, very different things. If you can't see a tuck in his stomach and an outline of his rib cage and feel his hips very easily, A, he's overweight, and B, that's the starting point. Like, that's the ideal body condition for a dog. So if he's not that way, you could stand to not feed him for several days without even offering it to him before you start offering it to him and try to do it through training. So that's step one. Just like with people, most dogs are fat asses and they need to lose weight. And so to say my dog has no food drive, what that tells me is that you haven't structured it properly. Go through and rewatch the foundation videos where I talk about structuring the dog's crate environment, and do that. If you use food and engagement with that dog, and by engagement I mean interaction. So that dog is in a crate other than when you're training it. And when you get him out, you're interacting and you're shaping and marking and reinforcing behavior. When you're done doing that, he goes back into the crate. And you do that for a period of, it could be a few weeks, it could be a few months. That is your boot camp. That is where you're hitting the reset button and teaching the dog everything. And so people ask, well, I don't want to have to crate my dog for his whole life, but you don't have to. I didn't have to go through boot camp for 10 years to figure out how to be a sailor. It took 2 months. And even that's debatable. But, the reality of it is that, that's what has to be done. And if you structure that to where the dog is bored out of his mind and starting to become hungry, he's going to look at that food like it's a whole new program. He's going to go from not giving a shit and bouncing it off his nose to where he'll do whatever the hell you want him to for it, and he'll love doing it. Watch some of the videos of Chance, the rescue dog that we took in at the start of the second year of the training. It's in some of the foundation videos. He's a caramel-colored pit bull mix-looking dog that was about a year old. Same thing. When I pulled him out of the shelter, he was about 5-6 pounds overweight and could not give less of a fuck about food. Didn't care about toys either. Within a couple of weeks, that dog was working for me like the most food-driven Malinois in the world, and he wasn't a sack of bones. He was a nice, lean, healthy, ripped-out, muscular dog and looked fantastic and worked like a beast. So that will happen with your dog too. This is one thing where I promise you that will happen if you do it right. Follow the steps in the program as prescribed, and it will happen. J.W. Cook, 17, 2.5-year-old GSD with submissive urination problems. Best way to handle this: tell him to grow a set. No, I'm kidding. First things first is, you're asking about medication training, building confidence. It's just started to occur more frequently. I would ask, has he been to the vet? Has everything, I would get a urinalysis, I would get a blood panel and see if there are any underlying issues, and I would rule that out first. If there are no issues with that, then yes. The building confidence and trying to not be overbearing is key. Using positive reinforcement and engagement in conjunction with kind of ignoring the dog. If you're seeing it where you approach the dog, go to pet him, tower over him, try to clip a leash to him. I mean, I don't know what exactly or when these situations are happening, but that's generally when you see it, is when you go try to interact with a dog that doesn't really want to be interacted with, maybe in the manner in which you're doing it, and they get a little submissive or scared and piss themselves. So think being stoic, pretend like the dog isn't even there, act like you're a 19-year-old Marine in a bar trying to pull some hot ass. Actually, don't do that, because they're going to do the opposite of that. They're going to be obnoxious as fuck. Who are we kidding? What you need to do is ignore it. Ignore the dog. Wait for the dog to come to you. When it does, builds a little bit of confidence by coming over to you, mark and reward it, and then walk away from it. In your house, it comes over it again, mark, reward it, and walk away again. Break that and wear that scariness that's existing in the dog to solicit that type of behavior. Again, unless there's a medical condition, that should help you out by building that confidence and just trying to be a little more stoic and even keeled in how you deal with it. All right, so Slug Mike. Hey, Mike, I need your help. I have a year-old female Belgian Malinois. She has bad separation anxiety and is a pain in the ass to take to the vet because she hates men besides me, has no issues with females, does not tolerate other dogs. Now, this is very similar to the one that I answered earlier. However, the difference here that I want to highlight very simply is the take, the context of men or taking to the vet as an example is that use the vet as a training experience, as a training session, rather. Take the dog to the vet when you don't have an appointment. Go there, walk in, click and treat, positive reinforce, contextually associate good positive associations or situations with that, and then leave. And do that with men too. Take the dog out in town, and if the dog looks at a guy and doesn't respond, mark and reward it. If they look at a dog and another dog and they freak out, or a guy and they freak out, wait for them to stop freaking out. And the second they give you some eye contact, mark and reward it. Use that as your distractor, essentially. But the difference here is that you're going to implement that out in town if it's specific things that are out in town that you cannot replicate at your house, i.e. a vet's office. With the guys, same thing. You can do that in your house, but do it in your house, in your backyard. Get that response that you're looking for, mark and reward it, and then go take it out in town. AKM McDowell 621. How do I get my dog involved in activities like bite work, obedience trials? She needs to work, and I don't think I'm doing enough on my own. I would set up a canine Tinder account for the dog. That's, what better way to get her involved in activities? Let me get a little serious on you. So activities in general, just go do them. Search for your whatever activity that you want to do in your area and find like-minded people and go work with them. The one thing I will say about this, and I talked about it a little bit earlier, is that the mind games, is the mental stimulation, is that's a lot of stuff you can do at home yourself. If you want the dog to get involved in activities because that's what you want to do, fantastic. If you're projecting and thinking that she needs a quote unquote job, which I'm not a fan of that association with dogs, generally speaking, but then you're doing it for you and not for the dog. If it's just a matter of the dog needs more engagement and stimulation, give them more engagement and stimulation. Do it in your house by, again, teaching some of those arbitrary skills that I talked about earlier. Johnny Land 111. How do you get a dog to stop digging? I have a 1-year-old male and 4-year-old Malamutes. 1-year-old digs and 4-year-old grew out of it but started again. Very common question. My dog is in the backyard doing shit I don't want. How do I get him to stop? Here's the smart ass answer is get him to fucking stop. That sounds like a smart ass answer, but that's actually the way it works, is that go out there with them and teach them to stop digging. Now, if you're one of these people that says, well, he only does it when I'm not there, then stop having him be unattended to while you're not there. Crate the dog and go out there with them. A lot of people say, well, I don't want to have to do that. Well, tough shit. You can't teach a dog to stop digging if you're not there to teach them to stop digging. Put yourself in the dog's shoes. If there is no consequence for doing something, how are you going to communicate that there's a consequence and you don't want them to do that? You really can't. Now, can you put an e-collar on the dog and stand in the window and correct them from that behavior? Yes, you can. I'm not a fan of that necessarily, and here's why. Is that it's not really coming from you. In terms of the dog's mind, is that I want that dog to understand that I'm communicating to knock that shit off. If I have a dog that I can turn loose in the backyard and just let them be out there for a brief period of time on their own, do I enjoy being able to do that? And do I do that sometimes? Yes, I do. Generally speaking, if you don't have a dog, or just in general, I don't typically like to do that with a lot of dogs for that reason, is that they may start digging. They get bored, or they see some sort of stimulation on the other side of the fence, and now they start to create unwanted behaviors because you're not there teaching the left and right flank. I would rather you have the dog crated, go out there, spend 5 minutes with it. If it starts digging, give it a correction, redirect it back to you, focus on that, mark and reward that. If it comes to where you have to give corrections because they'll do it right in front of you, fantastic. Now you're teaching him not to do that. But to just turn a dog loose, for an hour or 20 minutes or 5 hours, however long it is, and the dog's digging out and causing problems, you've got to address that by yourself in person and fix it that way and teach and communicate to the dog that you don't want them to do that. All right, Doggie Dojo. This is very similar, but I want to hit it again. Can we get your thoughts on physical and mental exercise for high energy, high drive dogs, and how to use exercise as a relationship builder, not just a mindless throwing of a ball? Great question. Here's how it differs a little bit from what we talked about, is that you can do both at the same time. And here's where I'm a big fan of the Office Space Bob's mentality of being an efficiency expert and getting the most bang for your buck and squeezing as much juice out of every minute of life that you can possibly ascertain or obtain rather. So the way I like to do that is with a chuck it ball and chuck it wand, is to exercise the shit out of the dog, and when they come back, do some obedience with them, shape some behavior, mark and reward it, do some problem solving, engage with them that way. So you're kind of killing two birds with one stone, is that you're getting the yah-yahs out in terms of the dog, really blowing its wad physically, but you're not just teaching him to be a better asshole, you're incorporating some of these mind games and mental stimulation and engagement with those sessions as well. So do both. Sam Bones Jones 25. What are your thoughts about using an e-collar for corrections, especially in terms of off-leash training and other dog-human reactivity? Similar to earlier where I talked about go through the process as intended for 6 months or so without using them. Try to build that repetition. And I have found that about 95, 98% of the issues you have with dogs are cleared up by going through that process as it's intended for a solid 6 months before you should be introducing any corrections, with some exceptions. The some exceptions are dogs that are extremely high drive, that are taking a shot at the title, or that are, their drive is so high to where it's dangerous just interacting with them in your training classroom, in your environment, etc. Is that in those extreme cases, then I may use prong collars or e-collars to kind of get them to where they're at least able to be dealt with day to day in my training environment. But that's pretty rare. Even with the high drive dogs that I typically work with, it's rare that a dog has that kind of drive where it's so overblown to where it's dangerous just trying to train him in the same normal environments that we're talking about. If after 6 months or you've drilled it over and over and over and you're still having issues, that's when I would introduce the corrections. I encourage you to watch the corrections video where I talk about how it means more at that point if you've got a good relationship built up, and I show you some examples of me correcting a dog from food and treats in the kitchen, and watch his response, and it's a good visual example of that. All right. Conley _C. Mike, love the podcast. Been a listener since the first drop. Well, thank you. My question is how you recognize a specific skill in a dog. As an example, how would you recognize if a dog is capable of tracking or better for personal protection or just laying on your feet at home? Very simply put, is that you've got to have an eye for a dog, is that you have to have trained a dog to do all of those things a number of times before you're going to be able to look at that dog and say, this dog is a good fit for X. If you haven't, you're essentially guessing. What I would recommend is that if you've not done that, is take the dog somewhere unbiased, with a professional trainer who has trained dogs to do all of the things that you mentioned, and have them evaluate it and give their personal opinion. Most of it is going to be genetics. I would say 99% of it is going to be genetics. How you recognize if a dog is capable of that is by putting them through the paces and testing them. For tracking, I look at hunt drive, environmental nerve, whether or not they get distracted while they're hunting, with some exterior distractions that I've purposely put in place to see if they continue to hunt. Personal protection, I have a whole process of staking out a dog and putting them in a host of different environments to see if they have the sack and fortitude and spine to be able to protect themselves and human beings when a predatorial figure is standing in front of them, not scared, capable of hurting them, and intent on doing so, how they respond. Just laying at your feet, same thing. I would put the dog through kind of a therapy test type of environment and see how good their environmental nerve is, if they startle easy, if they have any defensiveness, any nerve issues, whatever. And then go off of that. So, it really just depends on what you're looking for, or just have a trained professional evaluate the dog and give you their opinion on what they would be a good fit for, and then go with that. If somebody says, hey, this dog doesn't have what it takes to be a personal protection dog, and you say, well, I'll take it to somebody who's going to train it. If they say they can train it, they're selling you a line of shit. So, use genetics to determine what that dog needs to be for you is my best advice. NH Madman, Mike, can you tell what a dog's personality will be as an adult when picking one from a litter? Not really. Puppies are a crapshoot, which is why I don't fuck with them very often. There are some things that you can do and that I recommend. I outline a significant process in the Team Dog book, as well as a video representation when I went up to a shelter and picked Chance, and I evaluated several different dogs, and I show what I do and what I look for. So I encourage you to check that out. But the gist of it is I like to take them somewhere where I know they haven't been, and put them through some environmental circumstances and experiences that if a dog is nervy and a little bit shy or anxious or defaults to defensive aggression towards certain things that they don't understand or whatever, you're generally going to see some of that. In an 8-week-old puppy, however, it's going to be very, very scaled back, generally speaking. So the dog may turn into something a little more significant as they get older, and some of it is going to be the environments that you put them in or fail to put them in to prepare them adequately. A lot of it's going to be genetic, but short answer is not really. So it's you're kind of rolling the dice when you pick a puppy. That's just the reality. Rick 1285. How do I train my wife to follow what I've been trying to teach my dog? Brother, I'll tell you what, if I had the answer to that, I'd be a fucking billionaire. No, I'm kidding. How do you train your wife to do anything, Rick? That's life's greatest fucking question, I think. So, here's the deal. So you say you do 24 to 48 hour tours 2 to 3 times a week when you're away. The dog runs the house. Honestly, what I would do, and this is a bit of an extreme measure, because you say when you come home, she's a total nutbag, and the wife says only acts that way when you come home. Either the dog misses the shit out of me or my wife's trying to get rid of me. Maybe it's a little bit of both, Rick. I don't know. Maybe put some nanny cams in there and see what the fuck's really going on. Maybe you'll find some shit you didn't want to know. Who knows? What I would do is I would have the dog kenneled while you're gone. If it's 24 to 48 hour tours 2 to 3 times a week, I would set up a kennel run at your house because that's a pretty significant amount of time. And you essentially want to neutralize that time so you're not taking steps back, you're just hitting the pause button while you're gone, and instruct the wife to just feed and care for the dog. Make sure that the dog is, has food and water and is cleaned up after while you're gone. And then when you get home, crate the dog in your house and do your training sessions. When you're away, have the dog kenneled, have her taken. In terms of how do you train your wife to do that, I started off with a smart ass comment, but to be honest or to get serious and be realistic is that you've got to fucking do it. I mean, you have to say, here's the fucking deal. Like, this is what's going to happen, and you're going to do it, or you can pack your shit. I mean, that's how I would approach it, frankly, is that if it's a priority to you and you know, want the dog to be what you want it to be, then put your foot down and say, this is my dog, this is my house. I'm gone 2 to 3 times a week, and here's how it's going to work. And if she doesn't want to do that and isn't willing to do that, I would probably either get rid of her or the dog. I don't know which one, but you can't have it both ways. Like, if she's not going to do what you want, you either have to say, honey, we're not working out, or we're going to rehome the dog, because it's not going to work out if you're doing that amount of time being gone, and taking, you know, all of these steps backwards. I mean, you're undoing and being not just, I mean, you're being counterproductive when you're gone, if all of these things are happening while you're there, and it's not being followed through with. If you get it to where you do what I am mentioning, I would, once you get the dog to the point where, you know, he's totally dialed in, then you can start to incorporate the wife or somebody else into working with the dog, giving them commands, etc. But while they're learning, and while you're teaching them the basic obedience and all of the kind of manners in the house and how to be a dog as per your expectations, it should be just you doing it and being really, really consistent with it. Chris _Zemke, Mike, love the show and Team Dog Online. Appreciate your service. Question is, when would be a good time to start bringing my wife in on training? I have a 6-month-old German Shepherd. We just started month 3 online. We have a pretty good bond. I know you say in the book, keep it one person early on. Should I wait until she has a better grasp on the basics, or is it okay to teach her everything we're doing? Exactly what I said in the last one. Wait until that dog's completely dialed in. Even if you're doing great and training is going really well, do not incorporate somebody in and give the opportunity to take a bunch of steps back and undo some of that training. Appreciate the kind words. Melissa and Bear. I've got a 2-year-old German Shepherd who's too smart for his own good. He's so well behaved when there's toys or treats involved, but if he knows there isn't, he just stares at you like, I'm not going to sit. You sit, human peasant. Any suggestions? My first suggestion would be to not anthropomorphize your dog. That's step 1, Melissa. Too smart for his own good, no such thing. To me, you know, the smarter the dog, the better. They're more fun to train. The more operant they are, the more cognitively driven they are, the further you can go with them and the more you can get out of them. So I don't know, you know, if you're not a Team Dog Online member, become one. First and foremost, Melissa, because the fact is that if you've got a really smart dog, anytime I read or hear somebody say they're only doing it when toys or treats are involved, means that you're just being inconsistent with it. If you go through the process and adhere to the program as intended, check back with me in 12 weeks after doing all that, of structuring the environment so that you're building that repetition based on a manipulated environment, and you're creating the dog other than when you're training and feeding him. You do that for 3 months, and if you're still having this problem, come back to me and we'll reevaluate it. But I would bet everything I own that if you do that, you won't have the same problem. The gist of it is that there's not enough repetition to where you've created a behavior and you've shaped it and gotten it to the point where it's a conditioned response. And that happens a lot, frankly. A lot of times people, they see a little bit of progress with shaping a behavior, and then they shit can it and expect the dog to do it in any environment with no reinforcement. And there just isn't a big enough reinforcement history to have that happen. So you just need more repetition. J Bones question: best way to minimize itchy, dry skin in your dog? I've tried oils and other allergy concoctions. However, I wonder if there's a way to introduce a specific food which will help lessen itching. Any advice? I would first take the dog to the vet and have like a dermatologist specialist and see if there's any specific issues, other than if it's just a little bit itchy and dry and there's not like massive problems. to me, raw food is going to be your best bet. Raw food is unquestionably what I recommend to everybody to switch to, whether it's dehydrated or raw, frozen. Switching to that first and see if that gets rid of your problems, because way more times than not, that's the issue. Is it's something in a dry food, some sort of filler or something like that's going to cause that. In terms of how you introduce it, switch them over. To me, just switch them over to a good raw food. I would try the CBD oil also. That tends to help with immunosuppressive issues, which could be an issue with it, as well as salmon oil or some sort of good omega-3 type oil, and give that a shot. But the big thing, I think, is switching over to a good raw food, and I would go that way. Gordon Byer, I've never used a clicker in the 2+ decades of training dogs. Question is twofold. Why does it work? And is it too late to start with a 3-year-old Czech GSD who's titled in NADF? No, it's never too late. Why does it work? Very simply is that if you think about the way a dog's mind works, which is that A + B = C, it makes the simple associations with everything, is that what the clicker does very simply is it gives you a completely and purely consistent mark or bridge from whatever is taking place to a reward. So it's connecting that dot. That's why it works. Is that it's speaking dog essentially. Is you now with that or with anything. I mean, you can use a verbal marker. You can use snapping your fingers. I like to use a clicker because it's unique. Nothing else sounds like it. So the dog's not gonna be confused by it happening and not training or whatever. But that's really, it's that simple, is that, you have the ability to now communicate to your dog, what you're doing is what I want, and what you're doing equals, you getting a reward for doing that. It pairs the behavior to the reward, and that's it. Think of it like taking a snapshot. It's like taking a picture of the dog's behavior and then being able to explain to him, do you see, this is what I wanted, and this is why you're getting your paycheck. No different than, weightlifting or gymnastics or physical skills that, when you videotape yourself and you learn a lot more about the mechanics and things of that nature, is that it's kind of that same thing, is that the dog now understands the position that they're in, the behavior that they're performing or doing / offering is what is getting them what it is that they want. And so that's the beauty of it. It's the simplicity of it, and ultimately why it works. M. Bailing 91. How do I train my dog to stop doing a specific behavior that she only does when I'm not around? She sometimes chews on wooden furniture when I leave her home alone, but never does it when I'm there, so I haven't been able to catch her in the act. Very, very simple solution. Crate the dog. There is no way to stop that while you're not around. If she will never do it while you're around, she needs to be crated when you're not around. It's that simple. There is not, in my opinion, a conducive or effective long-term solution to doing that. What I would say is that on top of that is that do short sessions where she's crated while you're there and then gone and then there and gone, and build up the amount of time you're leaving her crated, so that you're making positive associations and not making it a negative experience for her. So she doesn't start to make the association of she's only crated when you're gone for long periods of time. Is introduce that way, so that, start feeding her in there, put her in there for brief periods while you're around, let her out, put her back in, leave for a little bit, come back, take her out, just mix it up so that there's not that contextual association, and she's making, that relationship. So I would do that. Let's see. Jason P75, when working in that first lesson with eye contact, click plus reward, do we need to have a certain amount of sustained eye contact or just a glance? My German Shepherd looks me in the eye and then looks my hands right away, since that's where the treat is coming from. But if I hold off and refrain from rewarding, can I get more sustained eye contact, which is better in this case? All right, great question. At first, I like to do just the glance, and it's the instant that their eyes meet yours, you mark it. That's where your timing's got to be really Johnny on the spot, and be accurate and really quick to be, exactly how you want it. from there, you're just like with everything else. Think of it like a downstay. Is that you're going to slowly build on that amount of eye contact, and you can do it one of two ways. You can mark right away and wait to reward a little bit, or you can build or scale the amount of time that needs to transpire for the actual mark or the click to take place. Now, the way I like to do it to keep it consistent with everything else is the criteria is in the length of the behavior, and don't mess with the click. I have used it that way where you're delaying the reward a little bit, and sometimes with like a down as or a stay as an example, you can do that. You may use that as kind of a bridge to build some of that time of eye contact, but generally speaking, I like to just scale up and increase the criteria or length of eye contact before the mark, and just do it really slow. So at first do, a couple weeks of just doing instant contact and reward right away. And then as that gets more and more pronounced and prominent, then wait, but wait a second, and then 2 seconds, and then 3 seconds, and then 5 seconds, 7, 10, don't jump right from 1 second to 2 minutes and then wonder why it's not happening. Is that you've got to really, really slowly increase that up. And it's that way with any behavior where the behavior itself has a pause or a cessation of movement built into the behavior. Also like a down or even a heel. Same thing is that if you're healing, is at first it's the second they start healing, and then it's 2 seconds, 5 seconds, and that's how you're building the length of criteria of the behavior. All right, D. Jan Drip. I do a lot of fostering and was wondering how you might handle very under-socialized, shy adult dogs. We end up with quite a few who aren't feral, but were probably yard dogs, fed once a day, rarely touched. Being in a house can be stressful and totally unknown territory for them. We find that they will hole up in a crate and rarely come out, so I'm wondering about some techniques, steps to help expand their horizons. Food doesn't always work, as their nerves will shut that off too. I talked a little bit about this earlier with in terms of kind of ignoring a dog, and I would recommend doing that same thing, but I would add a couple of key components. Number one is try to create an environment within that household that's as conducive as possible to letting the dog relax. Now, with most dogs who are in that position, an example would be where there's not a bunch of other crazy shit going on. Like if you've got several kids running around screaming and playing and watching TV and people in and out of the house and guests and things like that, that's going to exacerbate those nerves. So try to have it be a nice, calm, quiet environment where you're just kind of ignoring the dog. Like have the crate door open. If they want to hang out in there, hey, that's fine. If they come out, mark and reward it. Feed them outside of the crate, and maybe you put it to where the food is so close to where they only have to bring their first 2 paws out to eat it, and then they go back in. If that's the first baby step you have to take to get them to start to get more and more comfortable coming out of the crate, hey, do that. But more importantly, don't try to bait them in terms of you coddling or calling them over and drawing a bunch of attention to you and the dog and making it weird, as they say. Just try to ignore the dog and set that environment up to where it's nice and calm and relaxed and there's not a bunch of crazy shit going on. And then, gently get the dog to come out by using different motivating factors. And then once they do it, don't make a huge deal out of it that's going to put them back in that turtle shell, so to speak. So that's how I would go about that. Bully Mont. Hey, Mike, 16-month-old Mal. Overall very good. The last month we've been dealing with sleep aggression. If I accidentally touch him while he's sleeping, he wakes up in a panic and tries to bite. Sometimes he realizes it's me and stops himself. Twice he's made contact. The harder I work him, the harder he crashes, and the problem worsens. If I don't work him, he's better. However, that will open a new can of worms. How do I handle this? Bully Mont, that is a strange behavior for sure. One that I've only had one dog out of all the dogs I've ever had that was that way. I would crate the dog while they sleep for now. Now, 16 months old, I don't know how long you've had him. If you've had him since he was 8 weeks and you're this far in the relationship, to me, there's probably an underlying reason for that, and it's hard to say without knowing more of the story and what his background is or isn't, to be able to ascertain what that may be stemming from. But what I would say is I would crate the dog, and then that way, if you do wake him up, he doesn't have the ability to have a repetition of making contact or trying to make contact with you. Now, I would not go and fuck with him while he's sleeping in the crate, but do things to where if he wakes up, you're right there, he's right there. He realizes you can't you can't have contact made with him, but you're doing things that are going to wake him up while he's crated. Like I said, don't go over and kick the crate, but do things, around the house where those noises are going to wake him up, and he's going to go from sleep to awake, a lot of repetitions where he doesn't have the ability to do that to you. I would start with that. And frankly, do lots of repetitions of that, weeks, maybe even months of having him always sleep in a crate. And frankly, at that age, I would be crating him when you're not training him anyway. Maybe kind of hit the reset button, watch some of the videos I talk about hitting the reset button in terms of structuring with crate training and things to build that relationship and try to ease his nerves out a little bit. One more thing I would add to that is that, when you talk about if you don't work him, I would be curious to know what type of work it is that you're talking about. Generally, if you're just doing physical work and not as much mental stimulation and engagement, I can see where that may be exacerbated. Whereas if it was the transverse, where you're working him really hard mentally and not as hard physically, not at all, but just not as hard physically, that give that a shot and see if that helps mellow him out a little bit. But ultimately, crate him. Don't give him the ability to redirect on you and work lots of repetitions where you're waking him up and he can't do it, and see how that goes. Coach Stewie, what are some tips for getting an older dog that hasn't been conditioned to have his nail trims and ears cleaned to stay calm and accept the process? Good question. A very common one. Same thing as really any behavior that you're trying to introduce slowly to a dog that they're not real comfortable with is baby step it. What I like to do with both of those things is, and where I see a lot of people screw up, is when I look at where they're trying to trim the nails and clean the ears, it's usually like in their house. The dog's laying down sleeping next to a couch or on a dog bed or something like that, and they're going over to the dog or calling him over to him or whatever. It's in a normal, relaxed environment where the dog is, spent hours or, hundreds or thousands of hours of its life being nice and calm and relaxed, and now you're kind of fucking with their chi, if you will. So what I like to do is take them outside, take them into an environment where, maybe you've played a lot of ball with them, and play ball with them. Like I do that a lot with brushing, right? A lot of times dogs that we get in, some of the warrior dogs do not like being brushed. They hate the physical contact, and they view it as you fucking with them, and they get kind of shitty with you about it. So I'm not going to go into their kennel run while they're all full of piss and vinegar in their space and try to grab their collar and brush them right there. Instead, I'll take them out. We'll play ball for a few minutes. They're having fun. We're walking along, and while we're walking, maybe I throw a couple of brush strokes while we're walking, and they have a ball in their mouth. I have them out it, and I throw it again. I'm kind of slipping that in to an otherwise normal activity that they're doing that kind of has them distracted from what you're doing. And so with all that stuff, if it's trimming a nail, same thing, is that, wear them out first, physically get them tired to where they're going to be less likely to give you shit anyway, or they're not going to care as much if it's just being uncomfortable because they're so tired from playing ball that it's not as big of a deal. And that's with both nails and with ears. But, don't grab the dog when he's full of piss and vinegar in a place he's normally comfortable with and try to trim every one of his fingernails for 20 minutes straight. Build up to that where, again, you're taking him out. Maybe you grab a paw when he's exhausted and you clip one nail, and then you walk and play ball again. And then you lay down, you trip and click another one, and do it, so on and so forth. So baby step your way up, do it that way. And that's been something I've used for really anything, whether it's muzzling a dog, trimming nails, cleaning ears, brushing them, inspecting them. If they have a wound or something that's bothering them, same thing, is that, and it's one of the things I see in vet offices all the time. It's like, let's put this dog up on a slippery table where he's already uncomfortable, and now we start fucking with him and wonder why he reacts that way. I've got a great vet that a lot of times will bring the dogs up to to the parking lot. We'll just be walking around the parking lot where they're nice and happy and comfortable, calm and relaxed, and the vet will come out and look at them right there in the parking lot. Very, very different story if I try to take them in, lift them up, put them on a slippery table, and now this asshole's looking at him straight in the face, and now he wants to get attitude with everybody. So a little bit of proactive mitigation factors like that, just putting yourself in the dog's shoes and trying to minimize the amount of stress that you're putting them on them through physical exercise and their environment goes a long way. Harry the Protector, which Harry, damn good dog, I remember him. How do you feel about companies offering to train someone's dog to become a, quote, personal protection canine in 3 or 4 months, or selling a personal protection canine that's under a year old? Compared to someone like you that may take years training a dog, states that not all dogs are capable of becoming a protection dog, and actually goes and hand selects a dog that's genetically capable of becoming one. I mean, your question pretty much answers it for me, in that, number one is that I can count on one hand the amount of people who have brought a dog to me that says, hey, can you train my dog to be a protection dog? His chances are no. I go to great lengths and travel the world to find dogs that have all of the genetic tools to be able to do that type of work, and it is very difficult to find a dog that is physically capable and mentally strong enough to deal with a grown-ass man who's not scared of him and intent on hurting him, but also balanced and even-keeled and amicable enough to be able to be incorporated into a house with young kids and other pets and a normal, residential or suburban type environment. So because of that, and how hard I know it is for me, even with, all of the different vendors and clubs and people that I know that I can source dogs from, it's still really difficult for me to find one dog like that has everything of what I'm looking for. The 3 to 4 months thing, or just saying, send us your dog and we'll train it. It's no different than like, if your 15-year-old kid just doesn't have what it takes and you send him to, American Top Team and say, I want him to be a UFC fighter in 3 or 4 months, like that shit ain't happening. Just because it's a dog of a protection breed doesn't mean a fucking thing, frankly. And so the genetics have to be there. If they're not there, there's no amount of time that's going to change those genetics. On the transverse, the under a year thing, same thing, is that, that is too young. There's no dog that is under the age of a year that's going to be enough dog to do the work, that at 3 years isn't going to run you out of your fucking house. Like, if they're that strong at a year old, they're going to be too much dog, from my experience and perspective, for somebody to have a dog at that level in their house. It's just, I have come across some dogs that at a year or even a little younger than a year were real and would absolutely fuck you up. But that dog at 3 years old is a dog I would never, ever dream of putting in somebody's house. Way too much dog for that type of environment. So to me, the dog should be about 3 years old, maybe even a little older, to be both physically and mentally mature. Has to have all of the genetics and years of good, consistent training to put the dog in the right mental and physical space to be a good personal protection companion. That's why I charge what I charge. They're hard to find. I spend a lot of fucking time doing them. And, so it's, you get what you pay for. And there's a lot of bullshit out there, I think. Coney 21, how to stop excessive barking. There's a couple of videos on the online training, basically teach the dog to shut up. I addressed this in my last podcast to a certain extent, but I'll do it again because several people have asked. Teach the dog when it's okay to bark and when you want him to be quiet, and use markers and reinforcers to do that. If you're just yelling at him to shut up, he doesn't know what that means. First step is wait for it to stop, mark it, and reward it. So the dog understands the absence of me being an asshole and barking is what's getting me the reward. That's step one. And then number two is just do it over and over and over and over. And then teach the dog to bark. Teach him to bark. They like to bark. Give him an outlet to bark. Then tell him to shut up. Let him bark. Shut up. Tell him to bark. Shut up. Go back and forth that way so that he understands when it's okay to, when it's not. But then also, if he barks on his own accord, it's really easy to get him to stop barking because he's done it so many times where you've gone from letting him do it to telling him to stop, etc. West Desert Shooter, on a hike, say in warm weather, how often should I offer my dog water? She's a 60-pound lab. There is no real, definitive answer to that other than that, pay attention to them. When they start to, and I talk about this, some heat resources on the training site, is that, when the dog's tongue starts to curl back on itself, it's usually when the dog is getting too hot and you want to cease what it is that you're doing, get in the shade and give them some water. I wouldn't necessarily wait until that happens to give them water, but there's not a every so many minutes in this degree temperature. I mean, it depends on age. It depends on how overweight or underweight or ideal condition the dog is in. It depends on, the fucking humidity, the altitude, the dog's metabolism. I mean, there's a million factors. So keep an eye on them, offer it regularly. Just don't let them drink too much. You don't want them sloshing around and ended up getting gastric torsion, bloat, and or puking it all up or whatever. So just use a little bit of common sense. But the biggest thing is just keep an eye on them and give it to them when it seems like they need it. All right. This one's a little bit specific. D. Shernan, I have a 2-year-old German Shepherd, very obedient. The gist of the question is, does doing protection training change the dog's temperament? In my opinion, no. You're saying you believe that he's smart enough to make the correct distinctions between a threat and not, but you don't want to alter his friendly nature. I would agree. A good, well-balanced, even-keeled, temperamentally sound animal, understands what's a threat predatorily versus not. And that comes hardwired. When I do my stakeout tests with dogs to see if they have the appropriate genetics for police or protection work or military work, that that hardwired instinct it's either there or it isn't. And if a dog is super defensive and whatever, you can make it even worse. If a dog is not and they're even keeled, can you change it and make them a little quote unquote dirtier? Yes, you can. But the overall, kind of foundational temperament of the dog is what it is, and that's genetic. So as long as you're training smart and you're not kind of trick fucking the dog and making him not trust anybody because you're having people pop out and smack him and run off, and people agitating him at every turn every time he runs into all these different environments and trying to do a ton of scenarios where now he's expecting that all the time. As long as you're not doing a ton of that stuff, you're not going to dirty him up to the point where now all of a sudden he's a total prick everywhere. Can you do that if you try? Yeah, just be smart about your training and have it be balanced like every other aspect of your training, and it shouldn't be detrimental. Matt Merritt, 17, just got a German Shepherd, 10 weeks. He's blind in one eye, bringing him to an eye specialist to feel his eyesight may be even worse than what they said. Is there anything I need to do differently about training him? He has a tough time at night when we corner him off in the other room to go to sleep. It's like he needs to be in the same room as you. My wife's letting him sleep on the floor in our bedroom, and he's just fine, sleeps through the night. Wasn't sure if that's the right thing to do. Yeah, I mean, to me, I have my dog sleep in my room at night most of the time. It depends. I mean, it's not uncommon for there to be 2, 3, or even 4 fucking dogs in the house here coming and going, finishing for protection work or evaluating them or whatever. So there may be an instance where 1 or 2 of them is in my bedroom and 1 or 2 of them are in different parts of the house or whatever. But, for this and most people's circumstances, I mean, they're pack animals, they're social creatures. Fucking let them have them sleep in your room with you. In terms of the training, with a blind dog or a partially blind dog, is there things you need to do different? Yeah, absolutely. You may need to use way more sound, whether it's tones or different verbal markers or things of that nature. You're going to have to rely heavier on that. The dog's nose and his ears are gonna make up for what he lacks in his eyesight. So keep that in mind and use sounds and smells to your advantage to get him to come over to you with something that has a stronger smell that may entice him to do a recall or, things of that nature, so that you can pair it with your clicker and then reinforce it when he comes over. But yeah, you've got to project yourself into that dog's shoes and think, okay, if I couldn't see and I was going off of hearing and smelling, like how would I interpret this training scenario, and always keep that in the back of your mind. Kroll_V4. Mike, I adopted a German Shepherd cattle dog mix who's 8, highly trained, but I'm not sure the manners in which were enforced as punishment. That being said, when I'm petting him, sometimes he'll yelp if he feels confined. Would there be any way of calming his nerves, or do I just choke myself? Thanks for the time. Keep up the work. Always start by choking yourself. You can't ever go wrong if you choke yourself first. Here's the thing with, if you're petting him sometimes and he'll yelp, without seeing it, it's hard to say exactly like how hard are you petting him, where are you petting him. When he yelp, is it because you pet harder or in a specific spot, or does it just seem completely random? Those are things that would help, determine what the solution is. But here's how I look at that: is some dogs just don't like to be petted as much as others, and if it's either hurting him or scaring him, or I think you're probably anthropomorphizing a little bit with the feeling of being confined. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Maybe he actually hit something, maybe he's got a physical issue. Again, if it's in the same spot every time or whatever, maybe you have that looked at. It could be a nerve issue. It's impossible to say without having him looked at and knowing exactly what those circumstances are. But those are all things to think about. Pay really close attention to when it's happening, if it's in a certain room, if it's in a part of the house, if it's while you're sitting or standing, or, all of those things. See if you can kind of work backwards to identify and determine if there is a pattern in which the yelping manifests itself out of. So pay close attention to that, and then try to break that. Ultimately, if it's totally random and it just kind of does it whenever, and then maybe pet the dog less, honestly. It may be a simple issue is that the dog just doesn't really like being petted for long periods of time or in certain spots or whatever. So that just may be the deal with that dog. So, of course, you can also try to pair petting with, positive reinforcement and engagement. But before I would do or recommend something like that, I would ask yourself, does it seem like the dog's just uncomfortable? And if so, maybe I just need to stop messing with him so much and kind of let him relax and come to me for petting versus the opposite. 880, my 8-year-old Am Bully actually hates car rides. I can't confirm nor deny if it's from my awesome driving skill or from other shitty drivers on the road, or even the sound of my tires. I buckle him in every time we go somewhere, but he still tries to push his way to the front seat or my lap. How can I reassure him and calm him? I've tried anxiety pills from the vet, worthless. CBD oil on a treat, Benadryl, nothing calms him. I'd rather not have to give him meds. All right, so my guess is that when you're trying to work with him is that you're actually fucking driving. And that's your first problem. You have to introduce the car and quote unquote driving or going for rides, not unlike any other training scenario. I would load the dog up in the car and in your driveway, and sit there and work with him. Work on downstays. Does he have a downstay to begin with? If he doesn't, you need to teach that first. If he does, teach that in your car, very short, brief periods of time while you're parked in a fucking driveway, not going anywhere and not giving him the ability to be disobedient and not be able to do anything about it. On the transverse, you've also got to be able to slowly scale up the amount of time, the duration with which you're expecting him to be down there. Those are a couple of quick things that I would do to begin with. Now, some people would say put a barrier up. I'm not a fan of those, generally speaking, for a number of reasons. Some of it's a safety issue. The other component is very simply is that I want to communicate and teach the dog to stay the fuck back there and not just make him stay back there. I want him to make the decision to stay back there on his own and then be rewarded for it so that it means something and it's concreted in his mind and he's thinking and learning. So that's how I would do it. And then once you get to where you can sit in your driveway and he'll sit back there for several minutes and not mess with it, then drive right down the street, and then around the block, and then for 5 minutes and then 10 minutes, build up and scale that duration the same way you would a downstay on a dog bed in your living room. Treat it that same way, but you've got to incorporate your vehicle into training sessions in that static training environment prior to just jumping in the car and driving for an hour with him and getting pissed when when he decides he wants to come hang out in your lap like a good stripper would. Did I just say that? Yes, I did. Nav and Lan, how to correct a dog with separation anxiety, whining, scratching at doors to get out, digging under fences to get out, all only when I leave the house and she's alone. That's a very tough problem to deal with for all the same reasons that anybody else said. This only happens when I'm gone. No different than the couple of questions ago. Have the crate the dog when you're in the house. Short periods of time. Start by feeding the dog in the crate. Put the bowl of food in the back. They have to go in the crate. They eat, leave the door open. Just put the bowl of food in there and walk away and go about your business around the house. Get them to want to go in there and be okay with it. And then they're okay with it while you're there. Again, a couple of minutes, let them out. A couple of minutes back in, a couple of minutes, let them out. Again, all while you're there. And then you put them in the crate, and then you're in a different room, and then you're outside, and then you're gone for a few minutes, and then you come back and you're letting them out, and you're building on that again. Where people generally run into problems is when the dog makes that simple association that the only time I go in my crate is with no food and right before my owner leaves. And so that compounds all of these shitty behaviors, is that they don't like that. There's not a positive association. There's a negative association with you being absent every time they're in that. Now they make the association with a crate, or they make it in your house. And that, you've got to be able to control them and contain them so that they can't dig and chew shit up and ruin your house while you're gone. So you use a crate for that. And again, make the positive associations with the crate so they don't freak out and act like a total asshole in there. All right, new Agout LW. I don't even know what the hell that means. I'm afraid of screwing up dog selection for me and my family. Can you go over picking out a dog that fits your family lifestyle 101 again? I know, I'll go choke myself. God, I love you. I love how much you guys have adopted the choke yourself mentality. It's beautiful. Makes me feel like a proud parent. We're a young family that's going to have one kid hopefully soon. Sorry to hear that. And if my wife gets her way, we're going to have a pansy dog. Okay, well, don't let your wife get her way. She got her way with the kid, right? No, I'm kidding. Thank you for your service. God bless. Love the podcast. Well, thank you for your support. I do appreciate it. A couple things. I outline in the Team Dog book as well as the online training, and you're going to hear me say this because, again, that's why if you're not signed up for it, fucking choke yourself. If you're listening to this podcast and you hear me answer all of these questions, no bullshit, every single question that I've answered and every single question that's been submitted, there is something in either the book, the online training videos, or in the forums that addresses every single fucking question that's been on here. It's $13 a month or $100 a year to be a part of the community or buy the book as a good primer for it. But every fucking thing that you guys are asking is all addressed in there, and there's video representations of it. So, if you have a dog and you have these questions, for the love of shit, like, it's not hundreds of dollars. It's pretty reasonably priced. Go on it. And you'll get all of this information, and it will make more sense than me explaining it. However, the general gist of it is you have to have an ideal in your mind as to what that perfect example of a dog is for your living situation. If it's a small scrap of hair pansy dog, if that's the best fit for you, knock yourself out. I mean, maybe it is. It's not, I'm not here to tell you that you need to have a 90-pound fucking Mastiff to feel like a man. I mean, because if that's the case, maybe there's some other shit going on. I mean, let's be honest. Don't overcompensate, get a big expensive watch or an ass-kicking truck. I like busting you guys' balls, but here's the reality. Get what's gonna fit your lifestyle. If you live in a condo and can't exercise and work with your dog in an environment where it's going to need it, then get a dog that's conducive to that environment. With the kids thing, I mean, to me, it's kind of a non-factor. And I say that because if you're working with the dog properly and you're in an environment where it's conducive to bringing a dog up the way that you want to, based on what it is, breed, activity, lifestyle-wise, size, etc. Adding a child to the mix shouldn't make that big of a difference. If you're doing right by the dog and putting the time in. So a lot of that is going to depend on you and what your situation is, but have that idea in mind and then work backwards from there. get a dog that's gonna fit in with your lifestyle, and do your research. I talk about what to do with breeders and how to select them and things like that primarily in the book, and again also in some of the videos. But W.M. Reese, absolutely have a question. My dog has been getting a little aggressive and growls in a little bit of a hostile tone when it comes to putting him in the crate for the night. He'll growl and almost kind of snap when he's in there and you go to close the door of the cage. How do you almost kind of snap? What the fuck does that even mean, W.M. Reese? I'm kidding. Yeah, he's getting a little shitty with you. So here's the deal is that, I don't know how that was introduced to him. But what I would say is that, just like a couple questions ago of making positive associations with that, keep the door open and feed him in the back of it. Start by doing that. And even if that's when you're putting him in, like if you need to get him in and out, break your meals up. I mean, if you're using training food and rations for training, and you're having a problem, now this is part of your training routine. Getting a dog accustomed to going into a crate and chilling the fuck out in a crate, like every dog owner, that should be not just a goal, that should be an accomplished task for you. No different than your dog should be obedient and not fucking jump up on people or bite children, is that your dog should be able to go into a crate on command and lay in there and chill the fuck out for as long as you need him to. If your dog does not have that, you're wrong. I mean, to me, that is a no-brainer. Every bit as important as a recall, as healing, as a place command, as anything else, is to be able to do that. And so you need to integrate that into your training sessions and make that being comfortable going in and out of a crate part of your desired behaviors that you're shaping. And you're going to do that with food and with a lack of pressure. Again, it can't be only when you need him to go in there. That's when you're putting him in there. Do lots of sessions where he's in and out, in and out, in and out, doors open, food going in, food coming out, food going in, playing ball, throw the ball in there if he has ball drive. If he doesn't and it's just food, then again, use food, desensitize him going in and out, and do it over and over and over with the use of food until he stops giving a shit. That's the gist of it. Wild Bill _46, would love to hear your thoughts on dog food. I have talked about it a number of times. Short answer is raw and or dehydrated. If it's done right, you're going to be seeing some Tricos food coming out here real fucking soon that I'll be talking more about. But so be on the lookout for that. It's coming soon. But raw food, I mean, just like with people, the more bioavailable and real it is, the better it is for you. So I like to keep it real simple and have it be as close to as nature intended. Jen Bueller 81. How do you get a very friendly dog to stop licking? He does it not because he's nervous, but because it's his way of saying hello. I don't mind it at all, but other people come over to my house, don't like it. I'd love to have a command to get him to stop, but I'm not sure how to teach it. Two things. Number one, teach a place command. When people come over, if you have people that don't like to interact with your dog, put them incorporate your place command and have them fucking lay there while they come over. Your dog shouldn't be coming over to solicit attention from you and or any of your guests without you allowing it or saying, come on over here, etc. That's number one. So build that into your training regimen and your daily routine first and foremost. Number two is that specific behavior in and of itself, I mean, it's kind of not seeing the forest for the trees a little bit, and that, again, the dog, you shouldn't allow them to come up, period. So you're going to do a combination of kind of correcting it, but ultimately extinguishing it by discouraging it through reinforcement. It's going to depend a little bit on how motivated the dog is to do it. I don't like to wait for a dog to stop doing something annoying like that on people and then rewarding him for it. I would rather correct the dog. And so there's a couple videos I do called Be the Man. I would do that. If the dog comes over and starts to try to lick somebody, give him a little correction, tell him to go back in his place and have him lay there. Like just from an etiquette and manner standpoint, the dog should not be coming up and licking people. If they are, correct them, put them back in the downstay and leave them there. I mean, that's just how I look at it. Could you wait for him to stop and mark and reward it? Yes. But to me, there is a difference, and the analogy I like to use is, if you have kids and you tell your kid to clean their room and they go do it, they get rewarded. Great. If they don't do it and you withhold the reward, well, if the reward is not anything that's worth them not cleaning their room, so if the act of the dog licking the guest is of a higher reward value for him to just self-reward that way, then you're not going to offer him anything that's going to get him to stop. On a broader scale, it's kind of like telling your kid to clean the room, and then they tell you to fuck off. And you say, well, you're not going to get your dessert tonight. No, like, you're going to get corrected for that shit. So to me, licking and invading somebody's personal space falls into that category. And I would correct it. I would use a little bit of that be the man body language, get them to just back off and put them back over in their on their place command and work harder at keeping a good, solid, non-broken place command so that so you're not having those issues. OG Wifey 925. I go on hikes once a week with my friend and his 2 pups. When we are out and I recall my pup to check in, she runs to my friend instead of me. How do I work on redirecting her back to me? Also, on these hikes, my friend does not give her any treats for the recall. Only I do, and she still runs to him. That's actually kind of an interesting scenario, one that is not really that typical. What I would say is that I would ask, how many, how good is the dog's recall if it's just you, or in your training environment, if you're back at home where you're doing most of your training, bring the friend there, and how does that recall look in that environment? Teach it there first. The contextual association of the dog being in the training environment, he's going to learn more, or she is gonna learn more and faster coming back to you if it's already in the training environment where she has been learning how to recall. Get it solid there first before you try to do it out in a stimulating environment like a hike where there's a bunch of other shit going on. Work on yourself first. Get that dog's recall to be super solid in your training classroom, outside of your training classroom with just you. Then incorporate the friend in your training classroom. Get it solid there. And then work on it out in town. But my bet is that it's probably just not quite enough repetitions, is that, the friend is a little sexier than you right now because you don't have enough repetitions under your belt to really blast through that distraction. Nitro Nick 60. Who are some of the trainers you looked up to starting out? Fucking all of them, frankly. To me, I addressed a little bit on how do you, break into the training realm or whatever. Is it, there's a ton of them. I'm happy to sit here and list 200 fucking names, but the reality is everybody I've ever trained with, especially when I first started out, I looked up to, and there's a ton that I still do. To me, that's one of the neatest aspects of the dog training world, is the sharing of information. A lot of times it's a pissing contest and a little bit of an ego issue with a lot of people, which I hate, but that's part of every industry. A lot of people like to say that the other person doesn't know what the fuck they're doing and they suck and whatever. But there's a lot of people in the industry that the working dog industry specifically that I look up to, did back then and still continue to do so. To me, whatever element of training that you're trying to get into, is that find the industry leaders and try to learn from them. The one caveat with that is take everything, including what I tell you, with a grain of salt, at least to a certain extent. Is that, not everything works the exact same for every person. Not everything works the exact same for everybody. There's certain things that I do that work a little better for me than some people. Same with some dogs. I may try one thing with this or whatever. My point is that in terms of when it comes to trainers, is that there's going to be a lot of variety. I also like to look to people that are more like me, both physically, personality-wise, because what works for them is probably going to transfer over to work better for you than, say, somebody that's physically and emotionally a polar opposite from you. Still can learn from those people, but in terms of who you're going to emulate and really kind of start a good foundation, getting like-minded people that bring similar aspects and attributes to the table as you is going to help you out probably a little better. Max on, max off. Working through my first month of Team Dog, thank you, and I'm stoked on how well Goose, my pup, is responding to the training. I love hiking with my dog, and I'm wondering if you have any specific ways how I can continue building engagement with her while hiking. So far, I mark and reward every time she comes back to check in with me, and I've been marking and rewarding her every time I call her and she comes back with great results. I want to make sure I'm taking the right baby steps and that I'm not inadvertently teaching her bad habits. Fantastic to hear this max on, max off. That's exactly how I would do it and how I recommend doing it. The only note of caution or potential note of caution, I would say, is that when you're going hiking, you know, if you're only in your first month, just be a little cognizant of huge distractions. Is that, you know, I like to build at maybe a little more repetition in terms of weeks or months of getting lots of repetitions of recalls in my training classroom and around my property and things before I'm throwing them into a hiking environment where there's a ton of interesting shit that they may get overly distracted for and blow you off. But you're absolutely going about it the right way, and I like that you're doing both of those things. That you're both calling her back and she's coming, and you're marking and rewarding, and you're doing it when she's doing it on her own. That's what's really going to bring you over the edge, especially when you're initially laying that foundation of shaping a recall to where they're making that decision, and that is the huge disparity between free shaping and, say, luring or baiting, as an example, is that the arch foundational principle of operant conditioning is that it's the dog's actions, right? It is the dog's actions that are going to determine the consequences. And when that dog realizes and understands that it's their fucking actions that dictate the consequences, that is when you can teach them any fucking thing. So it's like using a GPS versus reading a map and knowing where the fuck you're going. Use the free shaping to really understand where you're going and teach dogs what the expectation is instead of it just be mindlessly following their nose. Anyway, keep up the good work. Thanks for your support. Brendan Baldwin. I have a 10-month-old rescued German Shepherd, still having issues with house training and chewing. Crate the dog. I've addressed this question a few times for a reason. It's very common. Crate the fucking dog. House training and chewing, crate them, take them out. They go to the bathroom, reward them for going to the bathroom outside. If they go to the bathroom inside, pick them up quick or take them out really fast. Try to get them to go out there. If they don't lose your shit on them. Crate them. Take them out early and often, and give them the opportunity to go to the bathroom outside. And if you're not working with them or monitoring / observing them, have them in a crate, or they're going to chew shit up and you're not going to be able to reinforce otherwise. So if you're not a Team Dog member, become one and watch the hitting the reset button and structuring videos. Go through all of the foundational videos, which is kind of the foundation of everything. 97 Knowles. Some police departments don't use vests for their canines because they've had dogs killed by bad guys picking them up by it and using it to hurt the dog. Example, slamming against the wall. Other departments use them to help protect their canines. What are your views on using them and when to use, when not to use them situations? This is obviously a little further beyond the scope of basic dog training, but I am answering this one for a reason, is that it's a common thing that I hear about people not bitching, but having the concern of a dog being able to be picked up by a vest. Here's what I would say is that my recommendation is to use the ballistic vests. I love the Canine Storm vests. They're light. They're very, very effective in terms of having a puncture-proof element to them, to where being stabbed or shot, it does a very good job at mitigating that. In terms of people being able to pick the dog up by the vest and using it against them, I call bullshit on that, and here's why, is that I don't need a vest on a dog to be able to pick that dog up and do what I want with it. They have their entire body covered in fur that you can do the exact same fucking thing with, and people will do it. So having a vest on them isn't gonna isn't going to now all of a sudden give somebody the ability to pick a dog up. You can grab their skin and their flank, the scruff of their neck. You can grab them wherever and pick them right the fuck up by that, just as easy as you can a vest. So I would much rather have that protection, including, having either strobe lights or cameras or GPS functions or ballistic protection on that dog than any of the detriment to it. So long as it's a good, high quality, lightweight product like what Canine Storm offers. That's my take on it. Jeff Spicoli. Hey, Mike, appreciate everything you do. I have a 6-month-old Hound Shepherd mix named Gracie. I've been a member on Team Dog for about 3 months. Typically do 5 to 15-minute sessions. I've gotten a little ahead of the program because Gracie's been picking up on everything very well. After building from single sessions on each, I now typically cycle through sit down, and speak, and she does very well. I've been working on place, stay, hear, and heel separately by themselves in their own sessions. My question is do you recommend working on one command for an entire month or completing 5 to 10 sessions of one and then working on another? I feel like I already know the answer. All right. Appreciate it, Ed. Sounds like you're doing great. Love the feedback, and just another example of people using the program as intended and having phenomenal results. So it's fantastic. There's not a specific, or should I say set answer to your question in terms of work on it for this amount of time and then move on to the next. What I would say is that you're going about it exactly how it's intended. So I love that you're paying attention to both the videos and the forums. Generally speaking, is that when it seems like the dog understands it, when you give the dog that command, you shape it first without saying it. Once they start to do it with, overwhelming prediction, then you pair it with the command. Once they understand the command, you're going through that, do it, and then do it exactly what you're doing is cycling through all of them. I do like to teach each one of those behaviors by themselves until I get to that point. Once I get to that point, then I cycle them all in. If you've got the sit down and speak, here's my take is that I probably wouldn't spend a lot of time on speak until you have the basic 5, all of the basic 5 down to a T with a command, and you can cycle through them. You should be able to tell a dog down and say sit, and they pop back up into a sit, or here, or heel, or whatever. And no matter where you're at or what position the dog is in, that the dog responds to that command with that behavior. A lot of times people shoot themselves in the foot by teaching down after a sit in succession every time. And a lot of times I fuck with people, and I'll call their dog over and say, sausage, broccoli, and the dog will sit and then down, because every single time they've come over, the next 2 words out of their mouth, they've sat and down and been rewarded for it. And so they don't really know what sit and down are. They know the context of something coming out of the owner's mouth when they're called over to them. So that's why it's important to incorporate a platform of some kind where you're teaching the dog in your training classroom, like I do in the videos, all of these different behaviors, and then working on different body positions, different distances, so that dog will sit and down and stay and heel no matter what position they're in. They'll perform that behavior. But to answer your question, keep doing what you're doing. Get all of them nailed, individually, and then cycle through them, and then start to scale up your distractions, both in your training classroom and then out in town, and keep crushing it. Scott Williams 77 would like to ask, is it possible to train a dog for hunting and basic SAR at a volunteer level? Genetics are going to dictate most of that. You can try to train a dog for hunting and SAR work, but if a dog has horrible environmental nerves and no hunt drive, not really. You're really, you're going to be volunteering to waste people's fucking time. If that's what you come into, both hunting and search and rescue work are specific enough working traits to where the dog has to have a certain level of appropriate genetics for you to be able to do that task at a level of competency that is going to be worth doing. And if they don't, then I wouldn't even waste my time with it. Mandolin01, want to start SAR work with my 2-year-old, but I'm worried about the longevity of his hips. My question is, are there exercises or specific training I could do with him to see at what level of fitness he's at and gauge if he can handle that type of SAR work. Are there stretches, supplements that you can use to promote joint health? A couple of things. Number one is keep the dog lean. That's first and foremost. Before you do anything else, is get him to where there's a tuck in his stomach, a faint outline of his rib cage, and you can feel his hips very easily. Until he's at that point, I wouldn't work him super hard. Lean him out, stop feeding him until you get him to that point, and then see how he does. Put him through different physical exercises and see, play ball with him, take him to playground equipment, see how well he spider monkeys around there, and how well he runs through there without falling off or being clumsy or running out of gas or whatever. And just see how he does. There's not necessarily like a checklist. I would take him to a lot of those things once he's lean and see how he does. In terms of helping his hips out during that process, swim a lot with him. Get him in the water, and instead of putting a lot of pound in the pavement time, especially if he's overweight, before you get him lean, do lots of swimming and lower impact stuff. Stretches, not really. Just don't get him out of a crate or the back of the car after he's been in there for 4 hours and throw a ball 200 yards to where he goes from being in a crate to being at full speed in 3/4 of a second from exiting the vehicle. Let him walk around and warm up a little bit before you start doing strenuous activity. In terms of supplements, CBD oil, the Trico CBD oil does work very well for inflammation in hips and mobility issues. We've had a number of dogs have phenomenal results with it, so that's good to start them on now to get a good foundation built and just keep them on it. Also good omega-3 oils, good raw food, things that don't have a lot of fillers and bullshit carbohydrates that are going to increase inflammation will also help in conjunction with the oil. That's about it. Baggins Lad 98. Can a Malinois be a decent family dog? I want a dog that thinks about my family safety as much as I do, but I wonder if that would be a big enough job for a Malinois. There is not a dog on the planet, Baggins Lad, that's going to think about your family's safety as much as you do. If there is, then you're not thinking about it enough. But I understand what your question is. I'm just being a smartass because that's what I do best. Yes, a Malinois can be a decent family dog. I would say, generally speaking, most Malinois are not very good family dogs. The ones that I find to do that type of work are really, really hard to find, like I lamented earlier. Doesn't mean that they're not out there, but if you're rolling the dice and saying, I'm just going to get breed X and want them to be a security dog or, a dog that's going to keep that in mind and be geared towards that, you're really rolling the dice for two reasons. One is that just because it's a Malinois or a German Shepherd isn't a guarantee that the dog is going to be wired that way. I've come across and tested and shit-canned thousands, tens of thousands probably at this point, dogs that were Malinois and Shepherds that did not have what it takes to do protection work. A lot of them are out there. I'm very selective and picky and have high standards, but the fact is that, you can't compromise and negotiate with assholes trying to hurt your family. And so you can't do that with the genetics of a dog that you're looking to put its life on the line to protect you either. So generally what makes a good working dog, or a good protection dog makes them an absolute motherfucker as a pet. Not always, but most of the time. So if you're just going to breeder X and you want a Malinois because you think he's going to be a hardwired protection dog without having to make sure that the genetics are there and then do the training, you're setting yourself up for failure as a protection dog and losing your fucking mind as a dog owner. That is my take on it. If you just want a dog that's going to look the part and naturally be kind of a pain in the ass territorially, cattle dogs actually are a better option. They're shittier attitudes, frankly, when it comes to garden vehicles and houses from a territorial standpoint than most Malinois and Shepherds. Now, when it comes to legit man work, they don't hold a candle to it, but something to think about, And I use the generalizations breed-wise a little bit hesitantly, but the fact is that, they typically are a little more better wired for that kind of stuff. So, keep that in mind. 2.
Okay, good. I only have 30 minutes left on this card.
Okay.
Good to go.
All right. L Pouch. You have a big long one, and then you have a big long one. Yeah, you do. There's a long post that you didn't ask a question. Then here's the second one. Devo is a great dog and loves to ride in our trucks. However, now that he's getting older, he's having trouble loading into them. We have a ramp, but he wants nothing to do with it and does not like being handled or picked up. Any advice or suggestions to help him be more comfortable with the ramp? Thank you in advance. Always having one for Bub. L Pouchy. I don't know who you are, my man, but fucking hats off to you, and I appreciate the shout out to Bub. He's one of my best friends, and not a day goes by where I don't miss that motherfucker. So I appreciate the message. In terms of Devo being a great dog and trying to get him comfortable with the ramp, 2 things. Number 1 is lean that motherfucker out as much as you can. That's one of the bigger problems. You've heard me say it a couple times now, but try to get him to where he is as lean as you can get him. That's going to help with the hips. In terms of being more comfortable with the ramp, turn it into a training session, right? Feed him at the top of it or even at the bottom of it if you've got to start there. You can put a Hansel and Gretel trail of fucking food up it and then have his bowl of food at the top. Set it down first. Have it just in your backyard where it's just the ramp laying flat and he's walking on it and eating food on it. You're hanging out on it to where he just stops giving a shit about it, and you're going to desensitize him to that first. If you try to go where a dog's like, I don't know what the fuck that is, and I'm just going to put it at a high angle and expect him to walk up there with no motivation, like, yeah, a lot of times an older dog that his hips hurt and he's never seen that, he's going to be like, fuck you, I'm not getting on that thing, you get on it. So yeah, lean him out, desensitize him to it with food outside of where it's at an angle first, get him comfortable with it to where he's eating on it, sleeping on it, hanging out on it, whatever, and then try putting it in the back of your car where if at first he's still a little weirded out by it, put a bowl of food at the bottom of it, and then halfway up it or a quarter of the way up it and then most of the way up it and then at the top with food running down. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can smear peanut butter all over the fucking thing and have him lick his way up and down like it. There's a lot of sick, twisted shit you can do to get that dog to like it, but that's the gist of it. Put yourself in his shoes and get him to not care about it anymore. Again, maybe we can have a beer sometime, Pouchy. Have a good one, my man. Last question. B. Phlegm. Someone told me that their dog does things out of spite. I don't believe this to be true, but what are your thoughts on spiteful peeing or chewing? I have mixed feelings on it. I think it's a similar mechanism with which we anthropomorphize with our dogs in thinking that they're spiteful. Just like a lot of emotions that we have that dogs don't have. It does not mean that they're not emotional creatures. They are. The complexity with which that they show emotion, whether it's jealousy or anger or aggression or spitefulness or sadness or happiness, etc., are generally not nearly as complex as the manner with which we communicate those emotions. So do they do things out of spite? I think that there's probably some element of truth to that, but not nearly as much as we give credence to. All dogs are a little different. I've seen some dogs that you're like, that motherfucker has to be doing that because they're pissed. And it seems a little less coincidental and makes more sense than other dogs where it's people really stretching and reaching or grasping at straws to try to project and anthropomorphize their dogs. But I'm not saying that they don't do it at all. I think that there's some elements to it, but I think most of it is people's ability to conjure up bullshit emotions that they have themselves and projecting it into their dog. So that is the gist of today's Q&A. One thing before we wrap up here, I do want to say some products coming out real soon here that I'm looking forward to introducing to you guys. We already have the CBD oil. Go to Trico Supplements. That shit works really well. There's lots of good feedback and reviews on it. Makes a big difference for a lot of dogs. I encourage you to check it out. Again, all of these training questions, every fucking one of them is addressed in a combination of my book, the forums and the online training, and the online training. There's videos, there are group discussions, there's people who have signed up for the training and posted videos of their progress, all of these things. So do yourself a favor, and when you're done choking yourself from not signing up yet, go sign up and put your dog through the program as intended. Even if you think you have your dog where you want to be, you can always get them better and more clearly communicate, and that's really the basis of this program. So get yourself in there, check it out. I appreciate all the support, all the questions, good as usual. I'm happy to answer them to the best of my ability. More than anything, I appreciate your guys' support, and I look forward to seeing you guys next time. And until that time, this is Mike Drop.